very good song translated into English. Um, David was talking about his deliverance, and he was talking about his ability to love God. And in Psalms 18, in verse 1, he said, I'll love thee. But in verse 2, he starts talking about the way that God delivers him and the words that he used. And I was reading this, and I was really thinking about the time when Moses was standing before the Lord as God appeared as the burning bush. And Moses said, who am I going to say sent me? And God, who always has these wonderful answers, he said, I am that I am. And it's all encompassing. It's everything. There's nothing left out. And so when David was talking about being delivered from his enemies and loving God for this great deliverance and giving him peace and rest, and looking back in hindsight over all that God had done in his life, in verse 2 he says this. This is Psalms chapter 18, verse 2. He said, the Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer, my God, my strength, in whom I'll trust, my buckler, the horn of my salvation, and my high tower. I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. And so one of the things David is noting, and it's always neat to kind of go take scriptures and just go back and reverse with them and say, I'll call upon the Lord, who's worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. I'm going to be saved from my enemies because I'm calling upon the Lord. And then he starts in verse 2, and we're kind of going in reverse, but in verse 2, he starts describing all that God has been to him through the last several months or year, whatever transpired, where he was really being hunted by Saul and by Saul's army. And David could reflect and say, this is everything that God has been to me. And it's not every word being the same thing. He's just, he's great in every way, but descriptive words to show exact positions. He said, the Lord's my rock. And a rock is a solid foundation. Jesus taught that in the New Testament. A man who follows Christ and does what he wants him to do and keeps his commandments is like a man that builds his house upon a rock. And everything that happens, it stands because it's founded right. It's the right foundation. And to be able to look at God as being the solid foundation. Now, most of the homes that we live in, especially in the States, with the codes and the laws, we have solid foundations. But you go into some of the areas that's older, I would say maybe some of the South, maybe Virginia, definitely in the East Coast and in the Boston area, the Cape Cod area, you find a lot of homes that the foundation is built on fieldstone. It's just a platform of rocks and a dirt basement. And though it had its worth and it had its strength, it only lasted for so long. And now those homes are getting hundreds of years old or 150 years old. And they're definitely not able to uphold a good solid foundation. But David says a rock. And when you see castles being built, especially here in Landstuhl, there's one just, well, not quite behind me, but pretty close. And it was built out of a rock. And it's very old. It's not going anywhere. It's on a solid foundation. God is my rock, unmovable. My fortress, and again, talking about the castles built into a rock. A fortress has a lot of advantages. Some of them were built with one way in, one way out, and once it was shut up, everything inside of it is protected. There's walls within walls, and usually a well there inside of a fortress. It's defendable. It's a place where people can still come and go secretly. You can view the countryside, and it's a very strong, secure place to be in times of trouble. A fortress. My deliverer. It's the third word that he uses, my deliverer. The one that actually comes through at the right time and secures me so that I'm not fallen into the hands of my enemies. Now, we can look at this in the physical sense like David did so many times, but we can also look at it in the spiritual sense. When we're founded upon the rock Christ Jesus, we're unmovable in our walk with God, unshakable. When we're in the fortress of God, there's no temptation that's going to take us, that's going to destroy us. God knows what we can go through and what we can handle. We're in the fortress. Though there might be war and fightings on the outside, we are secure and safe in the salvation of God. And again, that'd make a wonderful song, wouldn't it? My deliverer. And he is. He's our deliverer from death, from hell, from the grave, from a lot of temptations, from a foolish mindset, from darkness that prevails in our world today. He's our deliverer. And darkness does prevail in our world today. People's sight is so limited. They can't see afar off very well. But God is our deliverer. My God, my strength. And that's a wonderful thing to have strength. It's something you notice that you lose as you get older. But to have a God who doesn't age, a God that doesn't get older, a God that doesn't get tired, a God you can call upon all the time, in whatever situation you're in, recognizes the needs and is able to deliver even when you make your own mistakes. Now, I really encourage and I preach in such a way as to teach people to live right, to not fall into foolish and hurtful mistakes. People fall into mistakes, they fail at times. Sometimes it can be a lot of different things sown into the life before they get saved that still troubles them after they're saved. You keep in the good fight of faith, God will be your strength and your deliverer in all times. He doesn't grow old. He's there for us. He's a blessing in many ways. He said, in whom I will trust. Now, trust is something that has to be built up in most people's lives. We don't just randomly find a stranger on the street and say, hey, can you hold my wallet? Or, hey, can you hold my cell phone? Or he comes up and says, can I borrow your cell phone? No, I don't know you. I don't trust you. You might just run off. Trust is something that has to be built up, and it takes time. But God is someone who will prove to those who trust in him that he's trustworthy. He will not let us down. We don't always understand him, but he won't let us down. My buckler, and that speaks of armor on the outside, the shield, so to speak, to protect from the arrows that come. He protects the heart. He protects the mind. He protects our spirit, so that even in times of great distress, and everybody faces things at times, it's very distressing. But even in those times, he protects us. He keeps us from falling prey to the enemy of our soul. Keeps us from becoming bitter, hard-hearted, careless, callous, cold, indifferent. He keeps that love and that fire for God burning strong because he protects that spiritual life when we trust in him. The horn of my salvation speaks of the power of my salvation. Being saved is a wonderful thing, and God can keep what we commit to him unto that day when we meet him face to face. The horn of my salvation and my high tower. Not just a defensible place, not just the fortress, but the high tower where you can get a good bird's eye view of what's going on around us. When you're stuck in the midst of something, it's hard to see clearly. But when you're up in the high tower with God, and you can look around and see clearly that God's in control, it's a wonderful thing. God is all these things to us. I will call upon the Lord who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. What a wonderful psalm. What a great thing to read, to pray, to quote, to remember, to think about. God is everything we need. He's a wonderful God. Have a good day. God bless you. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. This is a Psalm at Noon.